In the year 407, the Emperor Constantine III led the last few Roman troops from these islands. The empire that had constructed this remarkable wall had crumbled in Britain. Our history books tell us that when the Romans pulled out, they took with them all vestiges of civilization and effectively turned out the lights. The country then plunged into centuries of cultural and economic chaos, known as the Dark Ages. Now, all of this would be fine were it not complete rubbish. As an archaeologist, I've spent my career exploring Britain's ancient past, and I now believe we've misunderstood the earliest centuries of this country's history. Instead of a nation crushed and then created by invaders, I've found a strong society with a unique and lasting culture. The Roman colonization is supposed to have erased the ancient Britons and instigated a troubled period dominated by invasions from superior civilizations. A period whose only hero was a mythical one, the legendary King Arthur, valiantly fighting the invading hordes. But I don't believe our ancient culture was overwhelmed as easily as that. I'm determined to examine what really happened in this country after the Romans invaded. I'm going to embark on an archaeological journey to uncover hard evidence for the story of Britain in the first centuries of its recorded history, the story of Britain AD. Using the latest archaeological research, I'm going to tell the real story of Britain from the perspective of the men and women who lived on this island during this period. And I'm going to start with the first chapter of Britain AD, the Roman occupation of Britain. This peaceful corner of Somerset is the site of one of Britain's earliest and bloodiest battles, and is evidence for the crushing of our ancestors in the early years of Britain AD. For hundreds of years before the Roman conquest, this dramatic hill fort was a religious centre for the ancient Britons. When the Roman conquerors arrived, the people up here were ready for them. The banks on the side of the hill are the remains of ramparts that would have stood 5 meters high. But the hill fort was not designed to face the disciplined might of the Roman army. The defenders were driven back and the gates set alight. The Roman troops stormed through the burning gateway and slaughtered the Britons. Men, women and children were cut down and their bodies left to rot where they fell. After this massacre, the Roman troops destroyed fields and farmland, a clear message to the Britons not to mess with the might of Rome. The events at Cadbury Castle tell a familiar story of the native Britons as tragic victims. It's a story that fits well into the conventional narrative of Britain AD. I'm going to show that this version of our past is wrong. The first few centuries of Britain AD saw the forging of our national identity. Archaeology is beginning to show that far from a dark age, this was a time of huge creativity and development. Until now, the legacy of Roman Britain has blocked our understanding of this period. In order to appreciate the significance of these times, we must go back to the archaeology. The archaeologists who excavated here at Cadbury Castle didn't only find evidence of a Roman massacre. They also came across building foundations that dated to soon after the Roman occupation. This confirmed what I'd thought, that ancient British culture was strong. But there's a final twist. The archaeologists had been looking for Arthur's Camelot.
The locals actually believed that this was Camelot. They'd been ploughing this field. They were coming up with all sorts of materials, most of it Iron Age with a bit of Roman stuff coming up, but they thought it was the site of a battle, really.
Yeah.
And then relatively small-scale excavation comes across massive refurbishment of the fortifications in roughly the right period, comes across a timber-framed hall in the middle with loads and loads of Mediterranean-type pottery scattered about. The fact that there is already a connection with Arthur's name means that the whole thing is ready to roll.
Could Arthur be a clue to what happened in Britain AD? The problem is that Arthurian archaeology is more than a little short of evidence. There isn't a corner of Britain that doesn't claim a connection with this historical celebrity.
And this is where Arthur's supposed to have been conceived. And this is Arthur's footprint. This is Bassinny Mound. King Arthur's Round Table is buried here. And every year, on Midsummer's Day, it levitates. And this is Arthur's Camelot. This is Slaughter Bridge, where Arthur finally kicked the bucket before being carted off to Avalon. As an archaeologist, I've always been rather skeptical of the Arthurian industry.
Arthur is the ultimate commodity, a ready-made hero who's been hijacked by history.
And in this dramatic visitor attraction high in the Shropshire countryside, there's a complete Arthurian package. There's a deep lake with the legend of a sword Excalibur, and I'm standing in Arthur's grotto, where someone claims they found the Holy Grail. There was even a stone with a sword in it until somebody nicked the sword.
Arthur encapsulates so many good qualities that we really want to identify with. Arthur's the great warrior figure, and he'll come back to save us when the nation is in its greatest peril. And that sort of story has an enormous attraction.
This gripping tale of Dark Age Britain has fired the imagination of writers and artists for centuries, and it would be easy to dismiss it as a fairy tale with no grounding in historical reality. But myths are not necessarily lies. Stripped of his medieval embellishments, Arthur has new things to tell us about this period. The idea of noble Arthur conflicts with the conventional view of the barbaric Dark Ages and supports my view that British culture survived the Romans intact. And at the heart of Arthur's story, I found a clue to the resilience of the native Britons in the aftermath of Roman rule. The myth of the sword Excalibur holds a clue to what really happened in Britain. The story of King Arthur is not a happy one. The tale involves an illegitimate boy who is raised by a magician called Merlin. The boy becomes king and assembles a loyal following of 12 men known as the Knights of the Round Table. King Arthur and his knights fight many gallant battles, but eventually Arthur is killed. His body is taken to the magical island of Avalon, where legend has it Arthur is not dead but sleeping, waiting for a time when his kingdom will need him again. Throughout the many different versions of this story, there is a potent image that comes back again and again.
Swords play a central role in the Arthurian legends. He learns that he is to be king of Britain when he miraculously withdraws a sword from a stone. At the end of his life, his magical sword Excalibur is returned to a goddess in a lake. As a prehistorian, these stories sent a shiver of recognition down my spine. The image of Arthur pulling his sword out of a stone was an eerie reminder of the ancient practice of casting bronze. I have witnessed this process. The orange glowing sword is actually pulled from a stone mold. In my work as a prehistorian, I had discovered ritual traditions in which weapons were disposed of in watery places and where islands had particular potency. How did these ancient British traditions find their way into the story of King Arthur, written centuries later? The answer lies just north of the Fens in a region known as the Witham Valley. In 1981, archaeologists digging here came across a remarkable discovery. Just under the surface of the fen, a series of upright posts and horizontal timbers were uncovered. They form part of a raised causeway constructed over 2,000 years ago. At either side of this causeway, archaeologists found dozens of pieces of ancient weaponry, including a large number of swords and spears. And this was not the first time that such objects had been found here.
In the late 18th century, when they were dredging the Witham, Sir Joseph Banks, a great scientist and collector, put out a notice to the workmen to say, anybody finds anything,